we're just gonna talk about like the board first, and then get into all the other stuff. But I wanted to ask you, like, when you get orders, and we'll start with mine. They can kind of talk about other people's orders, but when you get orders like mine, where I'm almost trying to talk through you as the shaper, sort of like, I want to ride like this. Like, I almost can't tell you, what to do in the shape room. I have no idea what that is, but I'm telling you, I need to go to Laguna, I need to go to Liso. What's the experience like where you filter what people are telling you? Was there anything specific about my board where you thought, oh, that's a good idea for what he asked? Or maybe you were like, I don't know if we remember exactly everything we initially said and then ended up on, but was there anything where you're like, that's kind of iffy, and I think we made some changes to the board, but it was, pretty basic with the Jake template.
Yeah, I think, my job as a shaper is to be a translator of that, right? Like, you tell me what you want the board to do, and maybe what your other boards are not doing, that you want them to do. And, a lot of it has to do with style too. Like, tell a lot of people, like, if they want a custom skimboard, then obviously don't simply just look at a size chart for that to be right, because that's just kind of like the company's idea of what is right for generic size of the person kind of thing. For you tell me, oh, I'm skimming Laguna, this is kind of what I want the board to do. So I feel like, I needed to translate that into obviously what I crafted you.
And then how would you, I think the funny thing is you got two LA guys ordering your boards and vastly different ideas. You got Jaden, which is pushing as almost opposite a direction a board as probably I'm getting. What advice would you have to buyers when they kind of see stuff like that? Should they be looking at the style that people are writing? Does that translate to the board? Is it more the writer makes the style of the board work? Stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly what I think you just said is that, the style of the writer makes the board work in a sense. Like, you can look at other writers in the past that may have written like really big boards for their body frame, and you can look at their skimming not being like a very erratic, snappy, bashy, kind of quick turn kind of skimboarding, when it's more of like cruising with a lot of style, a lot of crouching, a lot of, I guess you would say, steez to the writing, and that helps them be able to do that while writing at kind of more of a controlled, I guess you would say, style.
I know you have a lot of influences for your shaping, having experienced both like SoCal and NorCal and all that. What influences still kind of exist in the boards you make from the people you've shaped with, like Dree and Roush? What would you say you glean from them in a very vague sense? Like, what did you glean from them on not only what's good about a board, but especially with those guys, maybe what you can do different from what all the other bigger brands were doing at the time?
Yeah, I mean, that, working with Roush back in the day, he was like all about innovation for everything. Like, he was not afraid to try any new shape, any new, rail type of tapering, or, thickness of the actual blank itself, or whatever you want to say, Adrian was more of like, this is kind of a straightforward, works really well type of board, that's, I guess you would say, a little bit more simplistic, but works in the sense of where you don't need to kind of fix it in a way, I guess you would say, So I liked the exactly that about the slot stick boards, when I rode them back in the day and rode on the amateur team, and then transitioning from when Adrian passed to Roush, he was like, hey, I'm doing all this different type of stuff, and of course, at first I was kind of resistant to try it because I got kind of locked on to one thing, and then I was like, well, Adrian's gone, I don't know what's going to happen. So, Roush made my first custom skimboard for me actually when I was 13 years old, when he was working at Pearson Arrow, a famous Santa Cruz surfboard manufacturer. and he was making boards for himself, and he actually had a little team back then. And so yeah, I decided to get a board made by him by seeing him, rip it on the beach, and kind of like, hey kid, you're kind of riding something that's not, that good for what you're trying to do, and you being able to progress. And yeah, I've just always admired that part about what he did in his shaping, and kind of sort of what I apply to mine is like I was going to try to come back to is both of those things, like the simplistic yet technical aspects of both influences that I've had in the boards that I make.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was thinking about, it's kind of interesting, people considering how skim history gets lost, and for a lot of us, maybe a lot of our own skim history gets lost in like photos and stuff. People maybe wouldn't know as a shaper how good you were back then. I don't know that history part, but how has, I would say, since you were a kid and ripping, and now that you're older, have you really changed your shapes? Have you been experimenting more? Like, what's your like take on shapes now that, I wouldn't say everything's changed, but you probably skim a lot different now.
Yeah, I mean, like, for me now, I've been, personally messing around with stuff that I like to ride, and of course, I've gotten older now and decided to kind of up the volume of, my own personal skimboards, because, like we were saying earlier, it's a big style thing, and, my style thing has always been kind of like, fast, bashes and turns, and kind of, I guess you would say, more of an erratic style. So the smaller board always catered to me, much like, a rider like, let's say, the old school legend Ivan Ashauer always rode these really little boards. And, people are like, man, those are so tiny. But if you look at the way that he skimmed, being especially at places like Aliso where it's right on the sand, you don't really need a lot of planing surface, right? He wanted it just for maneuverability purposes, and that kind of made sense to me. Like back then I was trying some boards that were bigger, and I was like, oh, no way, like this just doesn't fit my style. I'm trying to force, a round peg into a square hole kind of thing, in a sense. But, like these days there seems to be a lot more novel kind of shapes out there that, other companies are trying, and people are kind of like, okay, I want to deviate away from just the plain pintail or whatever, which, if anybody asks me, it's the tried and true, best all-around skimboard. But I believe these days, everybody more so is having a quiver of a couple boards, maybe 3 boards, you get a fish, you get, something that's like bigger for further out days or weaker days, and then, you have your like, ultimate blade set up for, Cabo, Laguna, or, here in Santa Cruz when it's super close in, or anywhere, for that aspect in the skim world,
Yeah, it's interesting to talk about those more esoteric shapes. If you're shaping for a guy with a quiver, you don't have to say no to anything. You're like, hey, whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, like I try to, I guess pride myself on, is being truly a custom skimboard crafter. So, when somebody says that I want something completely outside the box, it's not going to scare me away. I first, of course, would tell them, like, I don't know how this is going to work. Basically what I did when Jaden wanted his moonlog shape, I drew it up and I looked at it and I just kind of laughed. I'm like, man, to me it just looks so goofy, But it works really well, I mean, he loves it and a lot of other people are loving it. So, I guess it definitely has its use, and it definitely really fits, obviously, his style. So that works out kind of perfectly for him. But in the terms of other people wanting to order stuff like that, yeah, I'd love to challenge myself and see if I can make something, that's crazily conceptual that works really well.
Yeah, the Jaden's boards are interesting insofar as even I, who loves weird boards, kind of saw that like, ooh, like concept board, that's cool. But the public's reaction was more, I think it's just that thing where people like something that looks cool, but it is, because when I see other people order it, in my mind I instantly think, well, like, do you ride like Jaden? Do you want to ride like Jaden? Is there some element to where it benefits you? But it is kind of that eye of the beholder thing where people are ordering the board And for me, I'd want to call them off it, but it's almost more fun when you get a board and you start making changes in your own style to fit it, as opposed to just getting the best all around board and doing the most basic average skimming.
Sure, and I mean that's exactly it. I guess that's the whole idea behind it, and I see that's probably why he wanted to try something different like that. It seemed like, from what he was doing even before he was writing for me, is increasing the volume of his skimboards to kind of like see maybe what the limit was, in a sense. But yeah, I mean, I definitely like to see progression with all that in terms of shapes and conceptual things like that, and kind of seeing what works good and what kind of doesn't, in a sense. I feel like if you have like a good foundation of rocker and a good rail shape and stuff like that, as long as obviously it's not too crazy outside the box, then it's probably going to work well enough. But I like to continue to see what can be done in terms of enhancing the rider's experience.
Okay, let's go over some of your history, which will be actually something for me that I don't know anything about. You can start as early as you want. I mean, whenever you basically first saw it, because everybody's with something as small as skimboarding. A lot of times the story is like, it's a lot more quirky than just getting a wave storm at Costco or whatever.
Yeah, no, that mine was definitely more so along the lines of actually seeing people do it. I think like the very first time that I ever saw it was maybe just a kid fooling around at Capitola Beach, is actually the place I learned to skimboard. But I saw a kid sliding around down there. I'm like, hey, that's kind of cool. And then, I ended up going back down there. I don't know the timeline in between, but I stumbled upon some actually good skimboarders at a place called Hooper's. This is around a big reef rock, liner, I guess you would say a right. And I was like, wow, like what is that, kind of thing, because I saw a kid, that's skimboarding, but what is that? It looks like skimboarding, but it's like surfing too, right? So I saw these guys ripping down there, having a blast, and I'm like, man, I want to try that. So one day I was sitting, I was used to skateboard some curves in the back of my condo complex, and a longtime buddy of mine and fellow skimboarder Cliff was coming down the alleyway, and he's got a skimboard, and I was just instantly like, just gravitated like a magnet towards him. Like, hey man, is that a skimboard? Like, and he's just like, big smile on his face. Yeah, man, I just came back from Capitola, and I got some super fun waves, and I just followed him, I think, all the way to his house, just asking him questions, and he's like, yeah, man, I'm gonna go tomorrow. You can totally come if you want. And then that was it. It just took me like one time of going, and I'm like, this is totally awesome. I want to do this kind of thing.
When you say you're skating, were you surfing before that or no?
I was mainly skateboarding. I started skateboarding when I was really young. That was like my main thing. And then maybe a little bit of surf stuff. But, I was only 11 and a half, maybe 12, I think, when I started skimboarding.
So how do you tie into... How'd you meet all the Ventura guys eventually?
That was just simply like going down to my first slot stick contest, which I believe was 98 or 99. I mean, I met some of the guys up here when they came up for which was then the Riptide Budweiser O'Neill skimboard contest. And, I saw Gio and Kuda G, Chris Rudolph, Jeff Gomez, a number of the other guys. I don't think Bill made it that particular year. I can't remember. I think he made it the year before my first ever contest in 95. But yeah, that's my first experience with the SoCal guys. And then in terms of the question of the Ventura guys, I went down to the contest there and, met, Pizza Man and Rick Stark and, obviously Adrian and all those guys. I actually stayed at Adrian's house, and this was before I even had a slot stick board, and I went down there with Miles Grobman, at the time a slot stick pro and local Santa Cruz guy, and a couple of other guys from here, and stayed with Adrian. And of course I was like a starstruck kid, man, going to his house, and the entire slot stick pro team was there, and we're watching skim videos, and Adrian's busting out these like historic, legendary like VHS, some stuff that probably nobody's ever seen but those guys in terms of footage. And I got to talking to Adrian. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be riding some Roush's boards or something like that at some point. I kind of talked to him a little bit about it. And then I just thought he was a super cool guy. He's super mellow. What he had to say about what he's doing with the skims and just checking out boards and stuff like that. I'm like, man, this is really cool, And then, I was riding some local boards here, Riptide Skimboards, and I was riding these boards that are way too big for me. And at a certain point, I just kind of decided by hanging around another Santa Cruz pro, Jesse Helm, on the slot stick team. Him and Miles are friends, and they were like, get a slot stick kind of thing. And of course, as a more impressionable kid, and that's when I just decided to call up Adrian. I'm like, hey man, I'd like to get a board. And then that was it, in terms of that. I bought some boards, kept going to the contest down there, out making more, closer relationships with those guys and hanging out and stuff like that. And then eventually got onto the amateur team, based on, Miles and a couple of other guys kind of telling Adrian that, I'm ripping pretty good, and, why not offer, Gary the then amateur bro deal, So I obviously was elated. I was just, like, man, this is so awesome. This is kind of like a dream to be on a skimboard team kind of thing, And yeah, that was pretty much it in terms of, connecting with those guys, getting on board, and kind of, treating the slot stick as like, the number one,
So, did you get to build any boards with Adrian? Did you get to that point where you could learn from him, or was that challenging insofar as you're not actually there all the time?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I was up here, I was younger, and as things progressed in my writing and timeline, things were getting rougher, it sounded like, for him, with personal issues and whatnot, and then eventually obviously him passing, so I didn't really have a chance, unfortunately, to actually physically make boards with him. I just talked, some tech stuff with him, over the years of, talking boards, like, hey, I want this, or, we tried a couple other different, conceptual types of things for me back then and what I was trying in my skimboarding. But, yeah, I mean, him and Roush are also, like, super good, kind of, I guess you would say, friends. When they saw each other, they would like to talk tech and, skimboard craft. And some of the stuff that Eric, implemented in his boards are also from what Adrian was telling him what he was doing, So that's why I thought it was, pretty cool to kind of try to do that also in my own thing,
Did it take some time for you to... I mean, you already had probably been talking to Roush or friends with Roush at that time, but it take some time for you to just let go of that idea of slot stick and start working with Roush sort of suddenly, immediately, or gradually?
It was years, until I finally switched over. Like, I was showing a board here at my house, which was the last custom one that he made for me, Adrian, and I just kind of rode that into the ground, not knowing kind of where to go next, in a sense, like, do I call up Tex and get a Vic, or do I hit up, Paul at Grape, or what direction do I go kind of now? I think, Exile kind of emerged, somewhat around that time when Adrian passed, so I didn't really know, obviously, of that going on then, so I didn't even really think of that as an option. But yeah, Eric was here, and he was making boards, and he was kind of trying to push his thing, and he made me, like I said earlier, my first custom skimboard. So I'm like, well, I actually had to swing this back around, I had a shaping shack in my then backyard, and he was like, yeah, I'm kind of looking for a better place to make boards. And I'm like, well, you can come bring stuff over here, it's small, but you can bring your stuff over here and we can make some boards out of my house. he's like, oh, cool, I'll totally, like, give your mom some money kind of thing as, like, rent. And, yeah, so we're making boards in the backyard, and he's like, well, since you kind of hooked this whole, like, thing up, like, let's make your board first kind of thing. And in the past, my experience with board crafting was just simply getting good at making repairs and fixing things and stuff, whatnot like that. So I always kind of had an idea in my head when I was younger, like, man, it'd be cool to make my own board someday and call it Terminal Velocity. This is like my 12-year-old dream. And so yeah, anyways, going back to the shaping shack, Eric's like, cool, we'll do yours first. Hey, like, could I come out there and kind of, help you or whatever? Oh, totally, man. I'm like, I've always kind of had this, want to make boards. And so he's like, yeah, totally, come out here. I haven't really taught anybody before, but you can come out here and kind of check it out. And then it went from kind of helping him as his assistant with vacuum bagging boards to me doing it on my own, and then him being like, whoa, like, you're kind of a natural at this. Like, I can just kind of let you glass and finish these boards and it looks like I did it, So I'm like, huh, okay. That's some pretty good praise from obviously a legendary guy. And so, I just continued with getting better at that. I didn't really do a lot of shaping for him, so the shaping part kind of was just, I watched some of the stuff, I kind of helped with some, like, little basic stuff, but he always kind of kept me from doing that in a sense. I don't know why. Maybe he didn't want me to be competition or something at the same time. So I ended up teaching myself how to shape and obviously do all the customization to templates and all the things that I'm doing on my own.
Was getting that crash course from Roush a really interesting experience, or does he get a lot more specific and focused when it's just the nitty gritty of how you have to do something?
Yeah, I mean, like, he's real meticulous in a sense of how you do things. So it was a really good thing to be taught by him to glass boards. He's really good with epoxy resin, which is much more difficult to work with than your standard vinyl ester or polyester. So he taught me the correct way to work with this stuff. So him being meticulous has definitely helped me in the long run with how I do things. So I want to keep everything totally tight. In terms of tolerances and whatnot with mixtures and heat and all that kind of stuff that comes into play when you're working with this type of composite materials, because there's definitely volatile at times. So,
and Roush was, to say he was the guy up here was kind of an understatement. I'm sure he took over from brands previous to him. How was... you've already you would have had that idea in your head. Did that idea start while working with Roush and all that? Or did it only really, you thought like, hey, I'm going to do this once he had basically stopped shaping?
Yeah, of course, like I said, it was always my kind of younger childhood dream, to make boards and call them my own, kind of in a sense. And yeah, like, what you just said about, with him being understated and all that in terms of being the guy. Yeah, he's doing amazing things. And what is cool is, yes, that it was passed on from, the original Santa Cruz skimboard shaper, which is J. Gordon Skimboards. Mm-hmm. Some might not know he made amazing composite skimboards back in the early 80s that, could rival anything that was being made during that time. And actually, Pete, that was the owner and crafter of Riptide Skimboards, worked with Jim for a while. And when Jim had a guy that did boat vacuum bagging and ended up teaching Pete how to vacuum bag skimboards. So after that, Roush came along and started working at the Riptide shop, right? And so he's doing all that kind of stuff. Pete's teaching him all the stuff that he kind of knows, and then Roush being like, innovative and whatnot and all he's into, he's kind of implementing the things that he wants to do in Pete's kind of system there. And, that ended up subsiding and Eric doing his own thing, the Roush Creations thing, and then, I started working with him. So yeah, like I really feel like it's passed from the originator, Jim Gordon, down to me in a sense,
Oh yeah, totally. It's just like a chain reaction.
Right.
In terms of where you're at now, which is, I mean, you've kind of stamped your name as the guy in Santa Cruz. Was there ever a tweener spot where it felt awkward? Because I think there would have been time as Roush was finishing and almost before you were really getting momentum, where dudes up here would have just been like, almost that situation you're talking before. You're like, what do I do now? Do I get a Vic? Do I get an Exile? Do I get a Grape or even a Zap? What was that time period like for you? And did it just almost motivate you to get to a point where like somebody has to be the guy here, especially for the good riders who, I mean, even if you're really good, it's hard to have a strong relationship with somebody all the way in SoCal, somebody all the way on the East Coast, etc., in terms of riding for them. So what was that experience like of maybe that tweener period where you were developing your brand and trying to develop a new team and get everybody, no, I don't want to say on board like it's like you have to ride, but getting something local that you can be proud of, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what you just said. It was exactly that. I mean, Roush was kind of transitioning out, and, my buddy Ryan Prola and I had the idea to kind of, hey, man, we know how to make boards, in particular you, and I am good at media, and I can do all this kind of stuff, and we can be this kind of like two-man team thing. And so we're like, let's give it a shot and kind of give that local option again, because Santa Cruz has had its own local board option since Jim Gordon in the late 70s. So it kind of felt almost in a sense it was kind of like my duty, to kind of keep it alive in a sense, like, of course I love every skim utopia that's out there, the guys in Laguna, the skim in Laguna, East Coast, Cabo, Mexico, everywhere, all has, their amazing board makers, riders, all of it. And I kind of just wanted to, in a sense, keep Santa Cruz on the map also, in a sense, like, hey, like we're still here, we're still a skim destination, we have people here that can make good boards as well, and kind of like, throw our name in the hat in a sense,
Yeah, and they come from, I'm not sure, you could talk about anybody who maybe helped you in that initially and then work your way up to getting to that point where you have, I think that core team of like Kai, Reef, and now Jake, those are, in terms of local guys, those are guys that I mean, it's kind of weird to say because it's just skimboarding, but you want somebody who's good at skimboarding to ride your shit. Right. You could sell to your friends all you want. You can be just like sort of a local hero. But I mean, when you have guys like Kai ride your stuff, then you have somebody maybe on the East Coast who's like, oh, I like the way Kai skims, in terms of watching his sort of like social media, and that's how you go from being just a Santa Cruz shaper to anybody in the world can want your board at that point.
Sure. I mean, and like touching on the first part, I guess, of Velocity when I first started it back, for my label back in 2000, I think it was 11 or 12, then I had like a pretty big team. I had Bill Bryan, that was obviously a big addition to the team, and obviously got a lot of kind of people recognizing, like Skim Online, people were talking about it back then, and whatever. Obviously that got a world kind of, I guess, view on Velocity, like, whoa, like, Bill the GOAT, is writing for this different company. So obviously that was, a great addition in a strategic way to kind of get yourself seen in a sense, So then, of course, I added everybody, that was around here that was really good at skimboarding, and, some guys on the East Coast and Japan and Mexico, all over the place in a sense, because I was trying to do the whole world skimboard velocity thing. So moving on from that, I stopped making boards for a period of time, and then I just kind of decided to pick it up again. And I got my equipment back from the old shop that Roush had, and yeah, just hey, I'm gonna make some boards for myself. And then a couple buddies found out, and then word spread kind of quickly. I was surprised, even guys from SoCal and other places were like, hey, I heard you're making boards again, really excited, I'm just kind of making some boards because I love to do it. And I obviously like writing what I can create. So it went from that to kind of like, hey, this might be able to be something again. I don't know, this has always been my dream. So let's kind of try to kick it into high gear. And I met, Connor and all that kind of stuff that's helped with the media and all that immensely, But yeah, and then touching in terms of, Kai and Jake and all those guys, yeah, you definitely want to be seen by, the public as like, hey, these guys have some really, skilled people writing their stuff. And, beyond that, I think this time around for me, choosing my team also wasn't just purely based on the writing, because I want people to go out on the beach and like really stoke out the kids and people that are coming, newly into the sport, not just like, hey, I'm Johnny Pro, like I don't really care about, anything beyond what I'm doing in a sense. So it just so happens to be that, those core of guys that you're talking about, Kai and Jake and, Reef, these guys are all greatly personable people. They're amazing humans, and super proud to have them all, because they're just, like I said, just awesome people to be around, and that makes people want to be around them and skim and have fun. And, that's what creates the whole lifestyle sense of skimboarding,
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at, because there was almost like two stages to that. I remember you started making boards, but I'm pretty sure I actually was getting out at that time, so I didn't remember much of it. But do you feel like, would you say maybe that was, if you want to imply that this time is different from the first time, do you think that might be what really makes it different, is when you have guys like Connor and your core team? Not that other people are not as good as repping it, but there's something about it. It's almost like that when everybody's on the same page, right? Because you can have writers that are all over, and maybe they don't even talk to each other when they're at the event. They're on the same team or whatever. But you have guys like Reef and Jake and Kai, and they're kind of, you see them in this little ball of energy at the event, and it's like, it's almost, even for a person like me who's not very impressionable, but I see stuff like that, and I'm like, oh wow, I want to be a part of that little energy bit.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's that, these guys are all individually great people, but also they, everybody gets along. So I truly feel like there's a family within the team, like this is actually a team, as opposed to like, we're all individual riders and we just kind of, ride for this team. But like, it's hard also with skimboarding. It's not like it's, professional football or, where you have to work together to, get to the same goal. It's more like, you're representing a particular company because, you feel that that's, kind of an extension of yourself in a sense, I feel like. So all these guys are, really psyched on, what I could do for them board wise, like, can you make me this? And you're like we were saying earlier, and I want to translate that, into a board, and them going, yeah, this was it, then I feel like my job is done. But yeah, having those guys being like that is definitely huge. And I feel this time around it's more of like a board collective family in a sense, We had a team barbecue during the contest that was up here, and almost everybody was here, thankfully, for it. And we all had just the most amazing session. The day before we stumbled on some amazing conditions that was perfect, and so we went from that to all getting lunch together, and and then having the barbecue and stuff like that. It was awesome. Everybody totally gets along. We're watching footage, we're laughing. It felt kind of really essentially what I wanted to succeed in with the Roush team that we had back then. And unfortunately it wasn't quite like that. So I feel like this is kind of a second coming of what I wanted to see then, in a sense. And that was, Roush's essentially idea back then as well, of what he wanted to succeed in with his team and having it be like.
And then having this core now, would you say that almost changed your, thinking about the first time you started, does it almost change your perspective? Because I look at a pickup like Jaden, and initially in my mind I was like, I didn't expect Jaden to want to ride for Velocity, and I didn't expect you to look at Jaden and be like, oh, that's a perfect fit for my team. And obviously, and also he's real young, so it's kind of hard to gauge that. But it's interesting to see. I don't know how that started. You can go over it, but it's interesting to see him just slot right into that actual vibe, and like he does the same thing when he goes to the beach, when he goes to the contest, or when he comes up here. He gets right into that vibe that is what you're trying to get at. Is that something that you saw, or maybe you think it just developed naturally? Like once you meet guys like Reef and Jake, you're like, oh yeah, this is how I'm going to be now, essentially.
Right. I mean, I think a little bit of both. It definitely probably even more so evolved, but I think it was like a mutual liking of like, hey, me personally, I really like the obscure type of riders that want to do like different stuff. Like they want different boards. They want to do kind of a different style with their riding, or kind of implement their own kind of independence within, their skimboarding. So I think it was a perfect fit, for both of us in terms of that first starting off, like, hey, like you'll make this crazy board that I want, that, I think is really going to, bring me to where I want to be in my skimboarding kind of thing. And, just talking to him personally, obviously not in person, but, we had a lot of lengthy conversations just back and forth. And, I'm like, I really like how this guy is. Like, he really fit well, I think, with what we're trying to do. Is super mellow, obviously, personable. He's down there kind of holding it down in a sense. And of course that was special for me too, is that he's down there riding in, one of my favorite places to skimboard there, which is the Gold Coast. And, when he told me that there was really no scene there, I kind of just really tripped out, because it used to be such an abundance of, stoke and skim and lore and, all that kind of stuff down there. But for him to be down there kind of essentially keeping it alive, that was really cool to me as well. So I'm like, yeah, man, like let's make this happen, and, make you this kind of dream board that you're kind of thinking conceptually in your mind, and see how it goes kind of thing, And yeah, I think it was just kind of evolved, and he was stoked. And, once we all got together, yeah, all those guys just fit, like, really well. Obviously they're all individuals, but it all kind of works in a sense. You got like, Jake's zaniness and Kai's mellowness, and then Reef kind of be both at the same time. And then, Jaden kind of is sort of like Reef in a sense. He can kind of be one or the other in a sense, So it's just kind of, for me as an older skimmer and, team, I guess, guy, the captain guy now, like looking at all these guys and just kind of laughing, like, they kind of keep me young, they want to keep, they're ripping, they want to keep me skimming good, they want to keep me young and kind of, still kind of like vicariously living through them in a sense,
And that core group is it's like probably my favorite part of Velocity, which is, it's weird to say, 'cause the favorite part would probably be the boards, but at the end of the day, it's easy for you to just make good boards alone, but it's not easy to curate that. So when it happens, it's great. And where do you see these things going? Not necessarily asking like your grand plan for velocity in the future, but what do you want to do, and not like with the boards or whatever, but what do you want to see grow from a development? Do you have any guys on your team that are interested in shaping, or do you have more people that you're thinking about putting on, or what's your vision for basically the idea of velocity, not just the board itself?
Yeah, I mean, just simply, growing, and like you said, to, like, me being able to make high quality boards on my own is much easier than trying to delegate this stuff out, because it indeed is challenging to make a consistent product every single time. Even when you're good, like there's so many variables to composites. They're pretty unstable at times. But yeah, I just want to continue to keep it grow. Have a good eye in continuing to add for team people. I just recently added our first women's pro, Jack and Cotter. And we're all really stoked about that because she's just, totally ripping. We got the kind of first, I guess you would say, look at her at Dewey. Reef went out there and, went to his first East Coast contest. And also a friend of ours, and Sung, was like, man, this girl is really ripping. And then so I'm like, okay, I put on the stream. And I'm like, wow, like, where did this girl kind of come from, like kind of out of nowhere. And I guess she's been skimboarding for a while, but I guess I missed kind of in translation somewhere there that I didn't really see her skimboarding back then. But anyways, yeah, we're stoked to continue to add more people, grow the amount of boards being made. There are Connor comes in sometimes, kind of helps out with a few things, with glassing bottoms, and he's kind of learning a little bit of stuff. And Jake has expressed interest in coming to, learn some shop stuff. But yeah, I mean, there's got to be a certain point where I can, teach some people and expand, beyond the shaping shack that I have now, and do the shop again, because at one point I did have a pretty good sized, really, really nice shop, on the west side of Santa Cruz here. I like to get into something like that again, and start pushing more production. But the main thing is that I rather have, less production and keeping the quality really high, and what I'm doing, isn't really simplistic in the way that I'm making boards. So it definitely would be harder to, I guess, essentially teach somebody to be as good as me. It'll take some time, But, obviously anything's possible with that. I can come across anybody in the surf board making industry here in Santa Cruz. Obviously is huge and world renowned. So, I can put the feelers out there and just have some guy that comes in, from that industry or the aerospace, which I worked in myself for a while, that really is high-tech type of composite work, and come in and, do some really killer stuff. But yeah, I mean, just getting more media out there, like we were talking about earlier with Connor, him and his wife Mary are like, extremely instrumental and huge to this project, growing and being seen, to everybody. So shout out to Connor and Mary, because they're like, just as much velocity as I am.
Okay. Do you want to end with any? You can end up shouting out people that have helped you along the way, or you can also just talk about. You can do something basic about like what skimboarding means to you, or anything. You can just start with the shout outs and then move with.
Yeah, it's like pretty much it. The entire team on Velocity. Every single guy. I appreciate them immensely, and their support. Is huge, and all the people that have supported me kind of along the way, and having. Even the public eye. The people that just I've order boards from me, choosing Velocity and trying something different, that's not, as mainstream, sometimes I guess is more difficult for people. But, I appreciate everyone's support thus far. And like I said, Connor and Mary are hugely instrumental. Obviously, my wife, she's, really helps me with inspiration and stuff like that. She's a great artist herself. So, kind of, I guess helping me keep stoked and, it's a grind. Making skimboards, as some of the OGs that have made boards around here says, it's a labor of love, because nobody's really going to get rich off of it, and obviously that's not my goal. It's just I love skimboarding. I've been immersed in it since like I said earlier, I was a 12-year-old kid, and I just love to see it grow for everybody, in a sense, not just myself. Like, I want to see Velocity grow and be a successful business and stuff like that, but I like to see the entire pie grow, so everybody can make money, obviously, and have the sport being more recognized as a something bigger, because I really feel that it can be. It's just a matter of how we can go down a whole wormhole of how that it can possibly get to that point, but I'd like to see it all grow for everybody, instead of like I want to kind of keep the pie small so I can keep my slice large. It's more like, hey, let's grow it to be huge, so everybody can kind of have a seat at the table, in a sense, and continue to push the tech of the sport, like in terms of board making, doing stuff that's out of the ordinary, trying new materials. Obviously a big thing for me is the quality and how long it lasts, the durability, whatnot, and the enhancing a rider's experience, because anybody can ride a decent skimboard really well. I mean, you're seeing guys in the Philippines do amazing things on waterlogged pieces of plywood, but like, I feel like once you get to a certain point, though, you can enhance a rider's experience with trying new things.